So welcome everybody to another end of financial year webinar. I cannot believe that it's another year already, and I'm sure I say that every year, but this one has gone particularly fast with all of the things that we've been having happening in the payroll space. But I'm really excited today about the webinar we're going to be sharing with you, and the name of it, the end of financial year de-stress instead of distress. It's going to be hints and tips and best practices to make your end of financial year a lot smoother than it could be if you don't attend this webinar. Today, we are being joined by one of my favourite people in the STP space, Chantelle Wayman. Chantelle and I have shared a long journey in the STP space. I think we go back well and truly over 8 years now. I think it's time for, as we were just joking, long service leave from STP. So we are going to have some really great information about the STP lodgements, some of the things that we're finding as issues, or the ATO is finding as issues that are still happening with STP. Even though I know a lot of you, this is not necessarily your first year of doing your STP2 finalisation. We do know that there are certainly some ELMO clients, so this is their first year that they're doing it. So regardless of where you are in that journey, I hope that you actually get some really valuable information from this session today, because we are going to be sharing some really good information to you all. Before we do get started, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country, and in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of Australia and their ongoing connections to land, waters and communities. I would also like to pay my respect to the elders past, present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people today. So some of the things that we're going to be covering today: STP reporting, allowances, setting up pay codes, RESC, RFBA, salary sacrifice finalisations, PAYG withholding, superannuation guarantee and fringe benefits tax, and there will be a couple of other little things I'm going to throw in at the end if we get time. We will be having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please pop your questions into the question and answer channel, and if we don't actually get to all those questions today, we will make sure that we provide some of those answers at a later time, hopefully when we actually provide the webinar link and the slides, but maybe it might be a little bit further after that. But please pop those questions in the channel, and we will address them as we can. So without further, one more thing first, what we always have to do, the disclaimer. So this presentation is obviously providing you with general information in that payroll related industry. So if you need specific advice, if legal or taxation advice, we do highly recommend that you engage a qualified advisor, because they can actually tailor the response to your particular circumstances. This is general information in that payroll space. So yeah, definitely engage a professional if you do have any other questions. Okay, without further ado now, I'm introducing you to Chantelle Wayman. She is the Director of Single Touch Payroll, Engagement and Support Data Services at the ATO. And as I say, has been on that STP journey since the beginning. So welcome, Chantelle. We are so privileged to have you and grateful to have you joining us today for our webinar. And I will now hand over to you.
Amazing. Thanks, Simone, for that lovely and warm introduction. It does make me feel old when I think about how many years I've been working on STP. I think I'm going up to 10 years in March. So not joking about the long service leave thing from STP, but, you know, I love it. And for those of you who I've been out in industry events and things like that, it's nice to see you again. So let's get straight into it, I think, Simone, because we do have heaps of content to cover today, and I want to talk about why accurate STP reporting is so important. And like you said before, it really has now been in swing for loads of years, right? I think, you know, we're going into 6 and 7 years of some employers reporting. And now we've all transitioned over to STP2 as well. And we've sort of taken a bit of a breath from all of that transition. And I think we really need to turn our minds to now about that accurate reporting. So it's really important because it ensures that all our employees out there have accurate information in their income statements and for their tax returns. On top of that, we now pre-fill their income tax returns with the right information. We can pre-fill labels W1 and W2 on activity statements where employers have those labels. And then, of course, the all-important other government agencies are now using the data when they're interacting with your employees. So things like customers of Centrelink and child support. And we're really starting to expand our use of STP data here at the ATO to improve compliance and make sure employers are meeting their obligations. So we're now able to look at information reported from super funds through what we call our member account transaction services, or MATS for short, with the amounts being reported in STP in one place. So it just really means that getting those pay code setups and allowances and on time and all of those different things are actually really important, and now more important than ever. So what we're going to do now on the next couple of slides is we'll talk about some common reporting issues and mistakes just to look out for. So we'll cover off things like reporting in time, on time and in full, transitioning to new software, incorrect allowance mapping, some pay code and item configuration issues we see. And then obviously I can't believe it, in June. So we'll talk about finalisation in the next few weeks as well. So let's get straight into it on the next slide, Simone. We'll talk about whether or not you're reporting on time and in full. Okay, so what do we actually mean by this? So it sounds simple, but we do actually get some confusion from employers around what am I supposed to be reporting at payday at that field. So most employers, as we all know, they have a regular payday each week. Most of us do, either on a weekly or a fortnightly or monthly basis. Now, I know there are some other different types of pay cycles as well, but let's just talk about the main ones. And they're usually defined by an industrial instrument like an award or an enterprise agreement and the like. Now, you're required to report a pay event to us on or before payday. So what do we mean by payday? It's the intended date of payment and generally the date the employee expects to receive their pay. All right, so when those pays are made electronically, which most are, of course, now as well, the date of the payment is either the date stipulated in the electronic transaction, or if there's no date stipulated, it's the date on which the payment is intended to be in the employee's bank account. And I want to cover it via an example. It's just easier this way. So let's say ABC Proprietary Limited, very original, I know that name, has an enterprise agreement and it stipulates that employees are paid weekly on Thursdays. So everybody knows they get their pay on Thursday. Now, the payroll department run and generate their regular, and this is where I'm going about running and generating. It's different to what payday is. So they run and generate their regular payroll every, say, Monday afternoon or Tuesday. They generate the bank file with the payment date stipulated as Thursday. Mm-hmm. That is the date we expect it to be reported as pay update date or payday in the STP report. We do see, and it does depend on how you've configured your software and what payroll solutions you're using, we do see sometimes employers accidentally report payday as the Tuesday because that's when they're running and generating the file. So just want everyone to have a bit of a look at that and just make sure in your STP reporting, are you reporting the correct payday to us? It matters for things like, is it inside the right financial year, pay periods over at places like Centrelink? So it really does matter. And we just want everyone to have a little bit of a look to make sure they're reporting the right payday. Now, are you actually, do you know when your report's actually due? And the key thing to remember here is that the pay event or your STP report needs to be with us on or before payday. So it's fine if you just give it to us a day early, but it's not okay if you give it to us a day late. It is an approved form like any other tax obligation. So it's on or before payday. Now, I hate using the word penalties because it's really not what we want to do here at the tax office. We would rather support people to get things right and help them along their way. But I do need to remind everyone that you can actually be penalised for lodging late. And it's a failure to lodge penalties and nobody wants that kind of thing. So just something as an important reminder this year to have a look, are you lodging on time? And the other thing is to think about whether you're reporting in full. And that's whether just making sure that you understand how to look for error messages. So STP reporting is a submission. It needs to pass a range of validation checks just to make sure we can process it. Sometimes you might have, an alpha in a numeric field or something like that, and we might reject the file. Just check with your product that you actually do know how to check to make sure we've received your submission and you didn't get any of those. We call them child record errors, but it's basically like employee level kind of errors. So just make sure you know how to check for those. And if you don't, obviously you can talk to your digital service provider. Now, just
Yeah.
back to reporting on time, in full, and by the due date. Of course, we understand that there are circumstances where some people might have a deferral in place. That's okay. You might be eligible for some kind of reporting concession. That's okay too if you've applied. And of course, out of cycle payments, it's still okay to report those in your next regular pay run. So that's pretty much it about just, making sure we've got those basics right before we start getting into some of the other trickier things.
Yeah, and I agree. You've got to engage with your software provider for those things too, because I'll make you laugh. We had one client that actually didn't even realize that they had to click submit. And so they thought they'd done all their reporting for the whole year and they hadn't sent any. So
no, it's like it's actually it happens. Yeah, it does actually happen. We've engaged with employers before to say, did you mean not to lodge your STP for the last 3 months? Like, oh my gosh, we didn't know it didn't go through. So just, that's some of that, just having a review, making sure we've got all those submissions, on time, in full. That's really our focus over this next kind of 12 months now that we're all taking a bit of a breath from phase 2. So you're right. Let's move on to unintended duplicates. So your payroll solution, this is a basic as well that a lot of people don't understand. So how do we actually create an income statement? So we all go in and we have a look at our income statements through MyGov. Your payroll solution generates an STP report by ABN and branch and business management software ID. And we use this combination along with the employee's payroll ID to identify when we need to display a separate income statement in ATO Online. Now, your employees will see 2 income statements if you've reported them more than once under one of those different combinations. So let's just say, and this is like a super, super common one, changing payroll IDs and branches, a little bit less common, but changing software, really common. So there's a few things you actually have to do to change software mid-year. Now, you can either finalize in your old software and then you start from 0 in your new software, or you can zero out everything in your old software and bring all those year to dates into your new software. You can also tell us the previous BMS ID. That's a little bit, that gets down to kind of like your product functionality. But generally speaking, the most common error we see year in and year out is employers have changed providers or software solutions and they didn't follow one of those steps and then they've lost access to their software.
Yeah, it's actually a question we've got in one of the questions.
Yeah, right.
They've actually asked us, they've got the previous, they've put all the details in, they have done a zero out of their employee details in the old BMS ID, and they've got a zero value reporting out on the employee's income statement, but they don't have access to the old software to actually finalise it. So what can they do in that situation where they don't have access to that old software to do the finalisation to get that zero record as tax ready?
Okay, so if that old income statement is already 0, you don't need to worry about finalizing a 0 income statement. That's fine. Okay, so you can leave it. But let's say you've got year to dates over in your old software and you can no longer access it anymore. Really, the only way that you can actually do it is by asking us to help you. So you'll need to give our call center a call, just one of those business. I think we've got a business line that we can pop in the notes a little bit later, Simone. But basically what you're wanting to tell the call center operator is that you've accidentally duplicated income statements and you need some help with blocking. Because what we can do here at the ATO is we can actually block records and we can sort of update your other records for you if you have it's a last resort, but if you can no longer access that software anymore. So too late now if you've already done it. That's okay, we can help you. But for anyone who's thinking about moving software, or just if you can spread it out there amongst your networks, there are some really important steps you've got to take when you're doing that, just to avoid those yucky year-end issues where employees are like, oh my gosh, my income's duplicated, I've got 2 income statements and it looks like I've earned double than I really have. So just some important things there to think about when we're doing those sorts of changes, Simone.
Excellent. And I think that's it. Get it right in the first place, guys. Follow these steps and you won't have all those issues. And yeah, if your employee is saying, I've got a 0 income statement, why is it there? You need to get rid of it. Say it's saying you don't have any income for that one. Learn how to explain that one to them as well, because I think you get that a lot, obviously, in the support centres for some of the software.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And look, a zero income statement really doesn't cause any dramas. Just explain to your employees you don't actually need to finalize it. It doesn't impact their income or anything like that. So don't worry about if it's zero, but if it's got year to dates on it, you need your help, just give us a call, and probably call now, because we start to go through our really crazy peak time soon.
Excellent. Great advice.
Cool. All right, let's talk about allowances. My favorite topic. Who knew that this was going to be so difficult with STP2? Totally get it. Appreciate everyone's efforts on disaggregating all of the allowances that are out there in the payroll world. So we changed them under STP2. Generally, all allowances need to be separately itemized now. We still get lots of questions from employers who just aren't quite sure where to report a certain allowance, and it's usually because the name doesn't lend itself to help. Some of the funny ones we get are things like strawberry allowance and horse allowance and mushroom allowance, and we have to really help the employer go back to, why is the allowance being paid? And the story behind the allowance is just so important, because is it being paid because somebody is having to do an additional task? So, for instance, are they paying a mushroom allowance because having to work in the mushroom garden is really gross and nobody wants to do it, and so you just like being compensated for doing this extra thing? Then it's task allowance. But is it because they need to maintain some kind of really special mushroom tool? I know this sounds a bit silly, but I'm just it's the concept behind it that's important. If they've got to maintain a special tool, then it's probably tool allowance. But maybe they need to have a special qualification to pick mushrooms, and they have to, have this certificate, and they've got to maintain this certificate every year, then it's probably a qualification allowance. So that's just my key message with allowance, is you've got to think, why am I paying it? Forget the name, unless the name is really obvious, like tool allowance. And get down to the back. Why are we actually paying this? And I get it. I know there's been people in payroll teams and they've like joined a new payroll team and the payroll team before them did it, and it's just this name. But, things like we don't want to see in other allowances, Simone's overtime. No, that's got a home now. So just that real kind of review of how you've mapped pay codes in STP2 as an end of year kind of reconciliation would be great. And it matters because obviously there's different treatments across the tax, social security and super system about all these different allowances. So I'm going to give you a really perfect example on the next slide. And it's around task and qualification and the difference between the two. So task allowances, like I said before, they're paid to compensate employees because they're doing a specific task or activity that's over the base rate of pay. We used to put those in phase 1 gross, but now they need to be disaggregated. So for example, let's say Caleb works in a call center, his team leader's going on holidays for 3 weeks, so he's going to act up and step up as the team leader for those 3 weeks, and he's entitled to some extra pay. So that's called higher duties in their business. That's reported as task because Caleb's being compensated for doing something extra. That's different to qualification allowance. Let's say Penny works in a childcare centre and she has to maintain a working with children check, and she's paid a small weekly allowance to maintain that every year or two, however long they need to be they're in place for. So, that's because Penny is maintaining a specific qualification that's evidenced by like a certificate or a license or something similar. Now, some employers get confused for first aid. If we think about why employees are actually being paid first aid allowance, it's not because they've got the first aid certificate. Generally, they're getting paid because they're performing the extra additional duty of being first aid officer. What we've seen is lots of employers confuse these, and we've got employers who have been reporting first aid as qualification. It really needs to be remapped to task.
Excellent. This is why I know people sort of jump on me when I say this, but I really like the introduction of STP phase 2 because it has really clarified the misunderstandings of a lot of these allowances in particular, like even car allowances and everything. It's been really great to sort of see where people are not actually understanding it correctly and misinterpreting those actual allowances. So to me, STP2 is a great thing.
Yeah, agree. And it's just made us all go back and interrogate what we're paying, right? To make sure we've got the right tax, right super sort of treatment, set them up. And the same goes for pay codes here. So, we've talked about, and I mean, don't laugh at our little mock-up of a pay code and setting up a pay code category. We know this is not what it looks like in actual software, but we just want to kind of have a little visual to make sure if there were any of those things over your phase 2 transition, or this year you've paid a new pay code or anything like that, that you're thinking, I just wasn't sure whether I really was supposed to map that to that particular category. Now's a great time to go and have a look, because we know everybody had to do extensive remapping of their pay codes. We know some of the things were easier than others. So it's just a really important reminder that pay codes matter to tax. They also matter over at Services Australia and for those employees who are interacting with agencies like Centrelink, because some things are considered employment income and assessed, some things aren't. And when we have things not reported in the right categories, it can have consequences for your employees when they're over dealing with Services Australia. So just a really important reminder there to have a look at those pay codes and categories, Simone.
Yeah, so in this circumstance where they have, because we do see it a lot and we get a lot of questions in the support centre of what we actually do if they have actually classified a pay element incorrectly, what can they do if they to fix it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So look, we haven't changed the corrections framework from when we first introduced STP, however many 150 years ago that it feels. So what we ask is that from when you identify it, you've got 14 days to correct it, unless you're a monthly payer. And then, of course, you've got to your next pay event. So it can be okay fixing that up the next monthly pay. What I will say, though, is if you can fix it earlier, because we're sharing this data with Services Australia like every time it comes in. So if you can and it's easy and you can just do that update event, or you can just fix that, quicker than the 14 days, that's really handy. But of course, from a legislative standpoint, you still have the 14 days or your next regular pay event to correct information in STP.
Yeah, and to support Services Australia a little bit too, don't forget, this is the first, 2 years really, but really year that Services Australia have been involved in STP. So
yeah,
they're need to understand it all as well. So if they've got information coming through that's wrong and then it's corrected and then all this sort of stuff, give them a bit of patience and understanding too, because they're still getting their head around it too, okay? There's my backup.
Thanks,
All right.
So now, yes, we're going to talk about RESC and RFBA and salary sacrifice and how many acronyms can we have for these things. So the questions we often get is, do I have to keep reporting RFBA and RESC now that I report salary sacrifice? The answer to that is yes, because we can, as you can see on the screen now, even though there's crossover, they're not actually exactly the same thing. Now, RESC is super that the employee had the capacity to influence and is above the minimums set by either the law, which is the SG Act, obviously, or the industrial instrument like an EA or super fund governing rules. So salary sacrifice to super is an example of that, but it's not the only one. There are also other examples like negotiated additional super paid under an employment contract that is reported as RESC, but not as salary sacrifice. And additionally, there are some things will be salary sacrifice to other benefits, but not RFBA. Because and it doesn't meet the RFBA criteria. Maybe there was a benefit provided that was an exempt benefit, or maybe the value wasn't high enough to be reportable as RFBA. So I know it's complicated. It's just really important not to fall into the trap of assuming the two things are always the same. We do actually have some good information on ATO.gov about this, so we can put some links out post-session as well, just in case you want to just test a couple of questions that you might have. I know it's hard, so we're always here as well if you want to go through Simone to come and have anything sort of clarified.
Excellent. I think this is one of those areas that I definitely always say, look, if you have any concern, any questions at all, really this is one of those areas I say engage an expert, because especially fringe benefits, I think it is so complex that I always engage a professional if I'm looking at fringe benefits questions anyway. So, and definitely we'll share those links because I know ATO has some really good resources there as well.
Yeah, great. So we're almost at the end of STP now before we start to get onto all of the other exciting things that happen at end of year as well. Again, I cannot believe that we are through another financial year again, and here we are. So, of course, a couple of key messages from an STP point of view is you need to lodge those finalisation declarations by the 14th of July each year. The due date, if you've got any closely held payees, is a bit later. But generally speaking, all other employees are 14 July. that's telling us that the information that you've reported to us is true and correct for the whole entire financial year. And then that way we can make those income statements tax ready in the income tax return. People love to lodge their tax returns like early, right? So I think it's just, making sure that 14 July due date is met. One of the things we often see every year is employers forgetting to finalise all of their employees. So let's say there's some employees you haven't paid for a few months, maybe they were casuals or a terminated employee that you haven't paid in the last few pay runs. So we call that partial finalisation. And what we often do is we'll write a letter to employers to say, hey, you haven't finalised what's happening. And they're like, oh my goodness, we thought we did. Like, what do we do? And it generally comes down to they haven't done everyone. So that's just something to check. Make sure you finalise all employees paid in the financial year. And also, I know this seems really weird, and some people tell us that there's no way their software would let them do this. But we often see in the first week of July lots of finalisations in that financial year. So check to make sure when you're finalising, you are finalising 2024 financial year and not 2025. So it's just, I think some software would let you and some wouldn't. So if you're using one of those products or you know anyone out there in your networks, just an important reminder is make sure you're looking at that right financial year when you're finalising. So to take a breath, STP, making sure you're reporting on time and in full with the right dates. Have a look at those pay code setups and allowances. If you've changed anything like a payroll solution or a payroll ID, make sure you've done it correctly. Excuse me. So that we're avoiding those unintended duplicates. And of course, 14 July is the deadline.
Yes, and I totally hear you with that. Some software providers do have that ability to change dates, and creative payroll people. We need to look at those sorts of things. So definitely something to be aware of. If you're getting those errors, as Chantel has just said, just check and see that it's just not something, well, if you're getting that communication from the ATO, just check and make sure it's not something that you've just missed, like a termination. And with that, I guess tax ready as well, seeing that those things are actually tax ready in the employee's screen. And amendments after finalisation, I like that little point here. That if they're doing an amendment after finalisation, that actually reopens it to be tax ready. It's something that I was very surprised about early on in the piece. But, that's how it works.
Yeah, it does. Yep. So, it's fine. If you make a mistake, you can refinalise. But, yeah, you need to, it sort of unfinalises. It goes back to not tax ready and then goes back to tax ready again. So.
Excellent. All right.
Okay, let's get into pay-as-you-go withholding. So on the next couple of slides, we'll just jump through. So, of course, some of this stuff is really basic, but there's just some really important reminders here. And, as an employer, you're responsible to collect pay-as-you-go withholding amounts, right? And that's from the money that you pay to workers and other workers like contractors who have that you have special arrangements with, businesses that haven't provided their ABN. And then, of course, you need to report and pay that amount or the collected withholding to the tax office according to your withholding cycle. So it's really important that you get the pay-as-you-go withholding for your employees correct, because if you don't, it's the payees that actually face the consequences at tax time. Nobody likes to get a big tax bill. On screen, you'll see just a basic overview of the steps that you need to take to make sure you're meeting your pay-as-you-go withholding obligations. Now, I can't reinforce enough that the best way to get your withholding right is to ensure you have good payroll governance in place. The first things that is required is make sure you're reporting your salary and wages to us through STP each pay event. No matter what sized entity you are, include the withholding amounts that you've paid to your workers on your BAS if you have one. Make the payments. That's a very important step. So, you do all your reporting, but you've also got to make sure that you're paying it as well. If you're a large withholder, you should be electronically paying the withholding amounts, and that's using your unique PRN or payment reference number. And again, no matter what amount of pay-as-you-go your business withholds annually, it's really good in practice to reconcile these amounts through your STP reporting and your BAS and your software and your records, just to make sure that you're getting that stuff right. Now, of course, there is that all-important step as well, Simone, that if there are things that are outside of STP, so there are some payments outside of STP, out of scope of STP, you need to make sure you're providing those payment summaries as well to all those payees, and that payment summary annual report to us by the 14th of August. So 14 July to the employees, 14th of August by us for those things that are out of scope of STP.
And those things that are out of scope too, there's some things that are voluntarily picked up by software providers as well. So there might be areas that they haven't actually reported through STP because that was a limitation of the software. So that's another place I would see payment summaries. But the other thing, it's not a square, it's a whatever they call it, it's not a hexagon, it's the other one. The middle one, reconcile your STP and BAS payments. A question we get inundated with in the support centre is, why doesn't my STP report match my BAS or my business account in the ATO portal? Why is it a different amount? Can you explain that to our viewers?
Yeah, of course. It's a really, really good question. So reconcile is a really funny word, right? Because I don't want people to think it has to match, because with STP, there are things that are in scope. So, salary and wages and allowances and directors' fees and all those sort of like payroll-y employee kind of things. Then there's some things that are like voluntary. So, for instance, contractor payments. Then there's some things that are way out of scope. So anything like, workers' compensation payments and pensions and things like that. We've got a whole table actually, which is really kind of self-explanatory of what's in, what's out, and what can be. So some of that is the reason why it won't necessarily reconcile when you're looking at your activity statement or your online services versus your STP. What I will say is also sometimes maybe some of those records didn't come through and we didn't process them, like there was something wrong with the submission. So we haven't actually got all of your STP reporting there. So those are some of the very common things to look for. Maybe there was a missed report or anything like that. But what I will say, Simone, is really go back to your software. That is the truth, the source of truth.
Yeah.
That's where you are keeping those kind of records about who you've paid, when you've paid them. And yeah, it won't always reconcile. Sometimes it will. If you're just paying salary and wage and that's it, it probably will reconcile. But there are always those little considerations and things to think about.
Yeah, and that's where I would actually just get in touch with my finance team. So when I had these problems and these issues when I was doing the payroll thing in the payroll world, we actually engaged the finance team and went through all that stuff, made sure obviously that the payroll data was accurate, did all our reconciliations in the payroll data, make sure those reports have been sent through, and then engage the finance team and say, hey, what's gone wrong here? Why aren't those things correct in the BAS statement, like even in the pre-fill? And they would actually then look at the pre-fill, oh, okay, we need to do this, because you can amend the amount in the BAS. And
Absolutely.
That's you do that if you pick up that error or that instance where things haven't reported correctly, you're actually just correcting that amount in the BAS.
That's right. And yeah, you're absolutely welcome to do that. We're putting it there as some help and support. But if that number's not right, you need to report the true figure.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
No worries. So let's get on to some key messages about pay-as-you-go withholding. So obviously we're approaching 30 June. So it's just time to check to make sure you're ready for lodgement and payment of all your end of year obligations. And it includes making sure your payroll software is updated and ready from 1 July to accommodate the changes to the individual tax rates and thresholds from the 2025 year. It is really important that you're confident with the quality of the data that you're providing us and reducing those errors, like I mentioned before, because you're already reporting that pay-as-you-go withholding, like we mentioned in STP. We will still utilise that to help you prepare your activity statements. But again, that's just help, right? That's just there to help you. You can change it. Now, some of the common errors we see with pay-as-you-go withholding, and it's regardless of the size and type of entity, actually, these are just the really common ones across the board. It's not reporting payroll information at the time workers are paid. So remember back to those STP principles, it's on or before payday. Not making the finalisation declaration, which I mentioned before, not undertaking those reconciliations, like the things that you just mentioned there, Simone, like working with the finance department and figuring out what are our numbers. This is a really common one as well, which it happens all the time. Businesses who are reporting under a different ABN than they thought they were, or under the wrong branch. So that's always good. We've often seen them come to say, we've paid all this pay-as-you-go withholding, but like we're getting these letters to say that we haven't paid our pays because they've reported the STP or the activity statements over on one branch, but been making the payments into a completely different PRN. So that's just another one of those things. Like, have a look and make sure, are we getting your payments to the right AVN and branch? And then, some other those sorts of simple errors are things that can just, like, literally they're avoidable and easy to fix. And it just helps us, be assured that you're meeting your obligations. And of course, we've got all those tax tables and online calculators and things like that, and that comprehensive guide for the STP to employer guidelines. So that's probably it in terms of pay-as-you-go withholding. But of course, it's obviously really important to make sure you're paying on time as well. And if you aren't able to lodge your activity statements or your pay-as-you-go withholding payments, you need to get in contact with us as soon as possible.
Excellent. And one of the things I guess we are hearing so much about is obviously the changes in the tax scales that are happening from the 1st of July. One thing I will recommend to people online today is make sure you check with your software provider of when those rates do actually come into effect. And I'm talking about if you are doing a payroll and setting up a payroll prior to the 1st of July, but you're not processing it until after 1st of July, you might need to do a refresh or something like that after 1st of July to make sure those tax tables load. But check with your software provider to see what they're actually doing and how they're actually applying those changes to the tax tables before you actually finalise and process that pay after 1st of July. So that's for the ones that you're actually creating the payroll before 1st of July, but you're not processing it until after 1st of July. Check that those tables actually do then load up. Okay, on to the favourite topic, superannuation.
Favorite topic, and such an important topic, right, for all of us. This is a community thing. So, if I think about SG, really what we're talking about here is, an employer's workers help build their business, right? Mm. So employers really need to help their workers by getting their super right. SG, superannuation guarantee, I just say SG for ease. It's not government revenue. So it is a form of saving for retirement for employees. And these retirement savings belong to the workers, and the ATO takes non-payment of SG really seriously. So employers need to check they're paying super for all eligible workers, as some contractors are also entitled to SG. And when it comes to SG, there are three things you need to remember. It's the right amount to the right fund and on time. Now, the SG contribution rate is currently 11% of an employee's ordinary time earnings, and that's going to increase to 11.5% on 1 July 2024. And now the rate's actually scheduled to progressively increase over these next couple of financial years, so it'll go to 12% by 2025. Now, there are three options available to make sure you have the right fund. Check your employees are provided with a standard choice form, and this allows them to tell you their choice of fund. If they don't choose a fund, you can request their stapled super fund from us and pay to that fund, or obviously select your default super fund if your employee doesn't have a stapled fund and hasn't chosen their own. Now, once you've got the correct fund, you need to make sure you provide them with your employee's TFN. It's important to pay the super contributions on time, and we all know this, and it's at least 4 times a year, ensuring they reach the super fund on or before the quarterly due date. So just a reminder, it's the 28th of October, January, April, and July. Had to just think about that for a second. And you need to make sure you're allowing enough processing time to ensure those super payments are actually received by the fund on or before the due date. We get a lot of employers that don't realise that. So if you're using a clearinghouse, check the terms and conditions. That's really, really important thing to look for. Now, what happens if we don't get super right, or the employer doesn't actually calculate the super right? The rules around SG are very, very strict. We don't have a lot of flexibility here at the ATO to turn a blind eye or anything like that. We just don't. They need to be received by the employer's super fund on or before that due date, like I said, and making a payment that arrives in the fund even 1 day late triggers the need to complete an SG charge statement. This is clearly articulated in legislation, and we don't have any discretion about this, like I said. And the SGC charge you'll pay is calculated using the salary and wages, not the ordinary time earnings. So it could actually end up being a higher amount. And SG charge also includes interest and administrative fees and penalty considerations. So it's just best to pay on time because it's actually going to end up costing more and it's not tax deductible. So the key tips here are really having those payroll governance processes in place to make sure we're getting on-time reporting, accurate, timely payments. If you do get the super wrong, you need to lodge those SG charge statements and pay the amount to the ATO within 1 calendar month of the quarterly SG date. Now we match data and we can see if you don't pay SG correctly. And you know what? We get lots of employees notifying us of unpaid super as well, and all notifications are actually reviewed. So look, my key message here is don't wait for your employees to come to us because it leads to additional costs and penalties. And we've got a couple of just key messages on the next slide as well, Simone, before we sort of finish off the super flavour of today. So I think I've, gone to the bit of I sounded like a bit of a grump in that session, but truly getting super wrong is quickly. And there's some common issues that everybody can just avoid, worker classification. Like I mentioned before, generally all employees are eligible for SG, but, there's some additional eligibility for things like independent contractors, delays in receiving choice of fund information for employees. SG payments actually still have to be paid, even if you haven't got that choice back from the employee, and the use of clearinghouses. So this is really important. You must make sure there's sufficient time is allowed for the clearinghouses to make payments to the respective super funds. So, sometimes this can take 10 days to process. So just looking at those terms and conditions, understanding what those processes are, just making sure you're satisfying your obligations, because at the end of the day, it's got to be in that member's fund by that due date.
Yeah.
So that's it from a super perspective, Simone, but I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything in there.
I'm just flick back. I think this is the thing, that it is about checking with the funds too, checking with the clearinghouses to get those dates. I know that they can vary, but definitely just reach out and it should be in your agreement. But if not, if you can't find your agreement, if you don't have the agreement, just contact the fund or contact the clearinghouse and say, how long does it take? When is my cutoff date to get you that contribution for it to be in the fund by the required date? Definitely a good one.
Yeah. And like I said, super is important for all of us. It's our retirement saving as employees. It's not a tax. So, just really important to be getting that stuff right.
100%.
Let's talk about
FBT.
The scary one. FBT, this is always an interesting one as well. So I think everybody who is in payroll has heard about FBT. But the question is, how much do you actually really know? And I have to test my thinking on this stuff all the time. So look, given the very competitive labour market that we're in, employers are increasingly offering benefits or perks like car parking and gym memberships and footy tickets, personal use of work vehicles, and sometimes this is the first time employers have ever done any of this as a way to attract and retain staff. It's often done without fully understanding what the obligations are to the ATO, and there can actually be FBT ramifications to providing some of these benefits to staff. If I can take or offer one takeaway on this topic, it would be to consider what the FBT obligations of providing a benefit to an employee is before providing the benefit. Now, to help employers and their agents, what we've been doing is a bit more activity in this space about communicating about FBT. We've recently commenced the second part of a Getting to Know Your FBT education campaign, which was designed to just increase the general understanding and awareness of an employer's FBT obligations. So we've been busy doing things like busting some FBT myths, like dual cab utes don't attract FBT, which attracted quite a bit of attention and discussion over this past year. So, if your employee is driving the work ute to weekend footy matches and towing the boat to go fishing on Sundays or going on camping trips, it's likely they will go above the definition of limited private use and will attract FBT. And it's just really important that you review each vehicle, and you can actually review this thing called PCG 2018/3. Again, let's put some of those links in the notes later, Simone, because as mentioned there on the slide, this is our practical compliance guidance, and sort of like the approach to determining private use and what we consider minor and infrequent and irregular, just so that we can help you make some of these decisions. And we do have a really good website called How FBT Works, and it's got a comprehensive guide on FBT for employers. So, if you're new to this, and you might be, because like I mentioned before, some employers they're dealing with FBT for the first time as a way to retain and attract new staff. That's a really good place for you to start. So I'm going to talk.
Site, yeah, definitely. And I mean, Elmo had to address this because we sponsored quite a few of the footy teams, and so we were getting free tickets to all the matches. So yeah, definitely we had to review that. So I highly recommend the website.
Yeah, good one. That's great. So on the next slide, what we'll talk about is just a few things that attract our attention in regards to FBT. So it includes not only those who are deliberately not meeting their obligations, but also employers who are just making common accounting errors or mistakes because they don't understand. So our biggest concern is those employers who provide benefits without really understanding the impact to themselves as an employer as well as their employee. It's those who aren't keeping appropriate records to confirm their FBT position. That's super duper important. Make sure you're recording those decisions and how you've arrived at that, whether it is or isn't FBT. Don't lodge and pay when they should. And you can see on screen our 4 main areas are really, attracting our attentions are with car fringe benefits, I should say. They're remaining the most common area where mistakes are being made, and it's around the motor vehicles and classifying vehicles as cars and determining whether or not a vehicle is exempt for the purposes of car fringe benefits, or treating all eligible commercial vehicles as FBT. And then, that other one, like I mentioned before, it's providing employees with a motor vehicle for private use, but then treating them as 100% business use. The next is not reporting FBT correctly. It's really important to cross-check reports and lodgements when reporting employee contributions and reportable fringe benefits amounts, just so that you're recording things at the right labels. Mm-hmm. And finally, this is one I actually didn't realize, but yeah, employers who are part of a corporate group, they need to lodge separate FBT returns. You can't consolidate the groups reporting into one return, because what happens is it actually leads to a mismatch of data, and that might trigger us contacting you. Oh, so, yeah. So, look, I'm not an FBT expert by any means. That is another department here at the ATO. But yeah, that I learned that when I was like, oh, okay. So employers have obviously thought they could just consolidate all their reporting into one, and they can't. So that's just a really important reminder. So FBT wrapping up, it's identify the type of payments, calculate the taxable value and amount of FBT, lodge the FBT return, and report for each employee's RFBA amount, and keep those relevant records, because they are all important if we do have to contact you and ask how you arrived at some of these decisions.
Yeah, and it's this time of year that the payroll teams need to actually engage with the finance team, because obviously what they're going to be reporting in the finalisation for their STP is those amounts that have been reported in the FBT return in March. So all that information is available to them from the end of March, well, say, a little bit after, maybe, depending on the finance team, but check with your finance team at the end of March. Have you got those FBT figures? Because I used to love getting them early and putting them into the STP report at that time, and then I didn't have to worry about them at the end of financial year. So again, FBT, if it's anything FBT, engage your finance department, engage your accountant, say, hey, help me out with this, because it is very complex. And obviously those two dates, differing dates, can make it a little bit confusing, especially the first time you're doing it. So yeah, definitely engage with your finance team or your accountant with FBT.
Yeah, really, really good point. And so really, I just wanted to finish up with all the different types of things that we're trying to put out there to help employers understand their obligations and payroll and their STP reporting and their FBT and SG, et cetera, et cetera. So on the right-hand side, you'll see my two bosses. We've got Emma and Peter. They do regular posts on LinkedIn with just important things and links to stuff that the teams have delivered, like I was telling you before about the FBT myth busting and things like that. Of course, ATO.gov is always your source of guidance, but there's lots of subscription services as well, different industry associations and payroll associations, and obviously the all-important getting actual proper advice from registered agents. And of course, we always say that when it comes down to things like software functionality, back to your digital service provider to ask them how to make these things work in your payroll. But yeah, that's pretty much it, Simone, I think, from all of our content that we wanted to just push out there this the end of financial year, just so people are supported. We know that end of year can be a bit stressful, but I really liked your take on from distress to de-stress. I'm going to implement that here at the ATO, because we are also like you. We go into our really crazy time as well, trying to help employers fix up their STP reporting. But yeah, look, it's been a real pleasure, and happy to take some questions now.
Thank you. And look, honestly, that was a 3 o'clock in the morning moment of de-stress.
I like it.
De-stress. So yeah, that's how crazy my mind works, that come up with these things at 3 o'clock in the morning. So yes, we will. We will jump to questions now. Now, I do see that a few people have actually popped them into the chat channel instead of the question channel. I will possibly get to those later. I'll go through them with Chantel. There's some questions that we will actually probably ask and answer outside of this. So one of the questions that I did have is that they've had an employee working in the US. So they have got foreign employment income, and they've been advised that they need to put in the amounts of the foreign tax that's been paid, because they've been doing the 100% Australian PAYG for all the amounts they're paying in the employee. And the question that we've been asked is, do they have to put those amounts in monthly into the payroll as far as the foreign employment income, or can they actually do that at an end of financial year?
Yeah, so it's fine to do it at the end of the financial year. We just call that kind of the true up. So just remember, like, STP works on a year-to-date basis, so there's no value or point trying to go and amend it per pay event or period. So yeah, just make sure it's the right year-to-date amount when you're doing your end of year. And I think that's pretty much it. It's that simple. It's just end of year, year-to-date. But of course, it's always really important to keep those records as well back in your payroll software, or however else you capture that kind of thing in your processes, is for period-based information as well.
Yep. I've got a one here that does come up every time we do an end of financial year. For June Super, if we pay it in July, that will form part of the financial year 2025. Is that okay?
Okay, so when's the payday?
Yes. So June. So for the June Super that they're making payment in June, but they've got to make the contribution by the 28th of July. So that is part of the 2025 financial year. That is correct. I guess you're looking at contribution caps there. Yes, definitely that is part of 2025. We'll answer that one offline as well, I think. Yeah. There are quite a few questions in here, and I think they're going to take a little bit of time to get through to all of them as well. One that I will just throw in here, Chantal. So just to confirm, if we move to a new payroll software, we need to finalise STP in the old payroll software. That is, if we did not carry over those payroll figures into the new software. Thanks. So that's from Bernadette. Bernadette, we're answering your question online.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So just to reiterate, and I don't mind spending a few minutes on this, because truly my team support employers where they can't get their STP reporting right for whatever reason. So Bernadette, that's right. You've got a couple of options. So of course, if you're starting on 1 July or a new financial year, then you start from zero and then all is fine. But if you are transitioning mid-year, what you need to do is either finalize all of those records in your old software, so then those income statements are done, finished, and we will populate those in the income tax returns as tax ready, and then start from zero in your new payroll solution. And then that employee will have 2 income statements for the year, but they are genuine, proper income statements, because that's one's finished. And then you've started from fresh. Or you can zero out everything in your old payroll, so there's nothing, right? Now, they'll still have a zero income statement, the employee will, but that's okay. A zero income statement doesn't hurt anything, doesn't hurt the system, doesn't hurt them lodging their tax returns. And then you bring all of your year-to-dates into your new software, and you start from those year-to-dates, and then you keep going. All right. And then there's that one income statement at the end of the year with all their income in it. You've got to do either or depending on what product you're using, some DSPs have built what we call a previous BMS ID. And that's where you can, it's very technical terms, but I'm going to say it's called threading, where you tell us, this was my old BMS ID. I'm going to put that in my new pay event. And then we know, bring all those records over. Now, that is some functionality that not all products do. So you would need to speak with your provider as to whether or not they do that for you. But if not, revert to the other options, zero out or finalize. Really important. But we do actually have some great ATO content. If you type that into just the search button in ATO.gov and you are transitioning to new software, it'll go through those options for you. So I hope that helps.
From a personal level, this is purely my personal feeling and my personal opinion. I really like keeping them separate. So finalising in the old system, and you've got all your reports and all your records and everything then matches. So that's always been my favourite way of doing it, because then you start with the new system from fresh. All the details and all the records in the new system then reflect exactly what you've processed in that system. So to me, that always made more sense to do it that way. I know we have the 3 options, but as I say, my personal opinion, my personal like is to keep them separated, as Red Hot Chili Peppers say. Okay. Last question here, and then I've just got one last slide to go through and a bit of a poll that we're going to do. And I wanted to do this one, Chantal, because we're getting asked this one a lot, is we have terminated employees saying Services Australia is requesting a separation certificate, and they thought that STP to replace the need for a separation certificate. Can you give us some advice here?
Yeah, this is a really good question as well. So what I want to say is, obviously, like you said before, Simone, Services Australia, this is the first time they're dealing with STP data, and they're doing really well with it. And we show them how to use it and what it's all about and how to understand it. They are definitely pursuing the use case, which is to reduce the requirement for separation certificate, and they've already had lots of luck in doing that. There are some circumstances where one is still required. So if an employer is asked for a separation certificate because Centrelink's asked the employer, or the employees come to you and asked, we're asking that you still do provide that. Sometimes it's down to like leave and, termination payments and things like that. They need that little bit of extra granular information about pay periods and things like that. So, and as we know, STP doesn't capture things like hours worked. So every now and then Services Australia are actually having to get a separation certificate, or what they try to do first and foremost is actually use payslip information as well. But on the off chance that you are actually asked for a separation certificate, you do still need to provide one, but they are definitely working hurriedly over there to reduce the need for separation certificates by using STP data.
Excellent. So we've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of last things for end of financial year consideration. Some of them we've gone through in this webinar now, but just as a reminder, updated variations is one thing that I always look at end of financial year. You've got the variations that have come from the ATO, that you only action from the ATO. Those dates now will end, obviously, end of financial year. What is your process for following up with employees? Do you have a process? What are you going to do? Send them an email saying, hey, it's run out, or are you just going to leave them to contact you? The other one, working holiday makers. Do you need to check any of the working holiday makers' residency statuses in Vivo to see that whether they are working holiday makers? Is that a process you follow? Is that something you do? Just a heads up, you might want to do something like that. Registered contacts. Are your registered contacts up to date in the ATO? Because that is something that will cause errors with your finalisation if your registered contacts aren't up to date. So just check those as a precursor to doing your finalisation. One that comes up every financial year, adjustments or terminations, and we did hint on this earlier on. You've got adjustments, or particularly you've got terminations that are sitting in the system that haven't been finalised, that don't come up in that finalisation process, or that are, for some reason aren't there. Just check those adjustments if you've got them sitting there pending processing. This is what I hate, when software providers call finalising a payroll finalising the payroll. It confuses the whole finalisation. So I always say submitted. So if those payrolls have not been submitted, just make sure you go through and check all of those. The one I really want to highlight, because I think we're still yet to hear whether it has been updated, but there has been advice given that there may be an update to the tax exempt cents per kilometre for motor vehicles. If that does change and we do get that updated cents per kilometre, making sure you're aware that that won't change the payroll tax cents per kilometre threshold until next financial year. It is something that the Payroll Tax Act states that the exempt cents per kilometre amount relates to the previous year of the ATO amount. So again, just check that, make sure you understand that it's going to be upped for the ATO side, but it won't be upped for the payroll tax side until next year. And the other one that everyone's talking about, minimum wage increase. Again, just check with your software how that applies. If you are starting a payroll before the end of financial year, and then processing that payroll after the financial year, so after the date that actually applies the minimum wage increase, just see how your payroll software actually applies that. Said that very quickly because we are hit time. So thank you, Chantel. It has been an absolute joy to finally do a webinar with you after 10 years of association. We got there, we did it. Thank you so much. It's been great information. I hope everyone has really enjoyed the information. We are going to throw up a quick poll just to see if you've been happy with what we've presented today, how much you've loved us. Please like us. And I hope to have another one with you again, maybe next year, but we'll see what happens. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us. And we really hope that you've got some valuable information out of today's session.
Thanks, everyone.
So just pop your answers in that poll, and so we can see how everything went. Other than that, have a great end of financial year, everybody. Hope it runs smoothly. Hope we've made it a little bit easier for you, and look forward to seeing you next time we hold another one of these webinars. Bye, everyone.